Hi, in this tutorial we're going to talk about working with Docker containers. Containers that are now on your system, whether they are currently running or not, can be managed in several ways. The first thing that we're going to explore is running Docker containers. When you execute a Docker run command, you essentially spin up and create a new container from a Docker image. That container consists of the contents of the image, plus features based on any additional options you pass to the Docker run command line. The command that you pass on the Docker run command line sees the inside of the container as its running environment. So by default, very little of the host system can be seen from inside the container. Here are some examples of the Docker run command lines that enable different features. The first thing that we're going to take a look at is just running a quick command that cats out the contents of etc host on the container. What we're doing with this command is a docker run -i-t -rm, and that gives us an interactive terminal with the sudo tty and then removes the container afterwards. We're running that against the Red Hat-rel-server base image, and we're executing bash. So a couple of commands that we have at our disposal are mount, and we can take a look at the file systems that this container has access to. Another thing that we can do is take a look at the contents of etc hosts, and we can see that we have an IP address that was provided to this container via DHCP through the Docker engine. That's 172.17.0.160 with a F55A host name that was also automatically allocated to this host. And for the second example, what we're going to talk about is just launching a simple web server. So we're going to walk through a series of steps to set up a simple web server and run it within a RHEL 7 container. So the first thing that we're going to do is just make sure that we have some existing data for the web server to serve out. And that's an opt rel data test. So we created this before, and it just says server up and running. And what we're going to end up doing is bind mounting opt rel data inside the container that the web server has access to. So let's go ahead and take a look at the command that we're going to use to launch this container. So we're doing a docker run -d for detached and -p to explicitly map a port on the host, 8080, to a port that the web server is listening on, 8000, inside the container. We're giving it a name of Python web and then a working directory of opt, and we're doing explicit bind mount of opt rel data with the -v to /opt inside the container. And then we're launching that on the platform base image, and we're executing a Python web server that listens on port 8000. So let's go ahead and launch that and just make sure that it's running. So now if we do a docker ps, we see that we have this web server running and it's listening on the correct ports. So the next thing that we're going to do is just make sure that the Docker engine is listening on port 80 as well. So if we do a netstat -tulnp and pipe grep 8080, we can see that Docker is indeed listening on the port that we expect. So now let's just make sure that we can access the content. So if we do a curl http://localhost, give it the port of 8080, and provide the path to the content, we can see now that the server is up and running and that the container is serving the content as we expected. So for this example, we're just going to talk about bind mounting log files into a container so that we have access to some of the activity on the host. So one of the ways to do this is to bind mount the host's dev log socket inside the container. So let's take a quick look at how that's done. Docker run -v devlog. So we're just bind mounting devlog from the host into devlog on the container. And then we're just going to execute the command logger, and we're going to do bind mount log files. And we're going to just hit enter here, and it should launch that container and initiate a log from inside the container to the log file on the host. And let's just confirm that that happened. Journal control. And we can see here on the bottom that we do have the message bind mount log files. So that's working. And that concludes this video. Thank you for watching this demonstration of Docker Basics, and don't forget to go to redhat.com for more information.